On September 14, 2015, 7 experienced hikers entered Keyhole Canyon in Zion National Park, unaware of the deadly storm brewing miles away. The narrow slot canyon, known for its short rappels and cool pools, was a popular spot, considered safe for those prepared. But as the group descended into the depths, a flash flood warning was issued. A warning that came too late. Within minutes, the canyon turned from a peaceful adventure into a deadly trap. The hikers' fate would mark the deadliest canyoneering disaster in Zion's history. Zion National Park, a vast expanse of rugged beauty in southeastern Utah, is known for its stunning landscapes, ranging from towering plateaus and deep canyons to dense forests and winding rivers. Among these natural wonders, the park's canyons, particularly the Narrows and the Subway, attract thousands of hikers and adventure seekers each year. However, our focus today is on a lesser-known but equally captivating location within the park, a slot canyon known as Keyhole. Unlike the wider, more open canyons, a slot canyon is formed by the relentless force of water carving through rock, creating narrow, deep passages that are often far more dangerous than they appear. On the morning of September 14, 2014, 7 friends from California, members of the Valencia hiking crew, VHC, were preparing for what they thought would be an exhilarating day of adventure in Zion. The group, consisting of 6 experienced hikers and 1 friend, had traveled to the park for a canyoning trip, a sport that combines hiking, rappelling, and swimming through these narrow, often treacherous canyons. The group was made up of 51-year-old Gary Favela, a sales representative from Rancho Cucamonga, group leader 55-year-old Don Teichner, who was semi-retired from managing his family's garment dyeing business in Los Angeles, 59-year-old Muku Reynolds, a special education aide, 58-year-old Steve Arthur, a traffic supervisor with the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, and his wife, Linda Arthur, a 53-year-old hairstylist from Camarillo, 56-year-old Mark McKenzie, a systems operator for Burbank Water and Power, and 53-year-old Robin Brum, a friend of Linda's who was invited along for the day's activities. The Valencia hiking crew was an active and tight-knit group, known for organizing trips to some of the most challenging and breathtaking locations around the world, including Machu Picchu and Mount Kilimanjaro. Under Don Teichner's leadership, the group had grown from just 300 members in 2010 to over 1,000 in 2014. Despite their experience with hiking and outdoor activities, most of the group members were relatively new to canyoning, with the exception of Mark McKenzie, who had extensive experience in technical canyoneering. That morning, 6 members of the group enrolled in an introductory course called Keyhole Subway Ground School at the Zion Adventure Company, while Mark obtained a permit for the group to enter Keyhole Canyon later in the day. Keyhole was considered one of the safer canyons in the park, often chosen by novices for its relatively short distance and manageable terrain. The canyon itself was only a couple of square miles, and many had completed it without incident. Between 2004 and 2014, Zion had only recorded 2 canyoneering-related deaths, one from a fall and the other from a rappelling mistake. As they prepared for their adventure, the group was well aware of the potential risks associated with canyoning, especially the danger of flash floods. Flash floods are a constant threat in slot canyons, where rainwater can quickly funnel into the narrow passages, turning what appears to be a calm and dry area into a deadly torrent of water within minutes. The group's training course emphasized these dangers and provided instructions on what to do in the event of such an emergency. After completing their training, the group returned to their campsite to prepare for the canyoning trip. Don Teichner, ever the cautious leader, called his wife to express some concerns about the weather. Although the forecast for Zion National Park indicated dry conditions, the sky seemed to suggest otherwise. Still, Don was excited about the day's activities and shared his enthusiasm with his wife, telling her how much he had enjoyed the training course and that he would love to show her how to rappel someday. His wife, who had stayed behind due to work commitments, responded with a laugh, joking that she would prefer to take her own class rather than rely on his instructions. At around the same time, Mark McKenzie sent a text message to his son saying, "Eating lunch, this is my view. Maybe Keyhole this afternoon." Attached to the text was a photo of the stunning scenery surrounding them. Mark had already spent a week earlier in the year canyoning with his other son, completing Keyhole and several other more challenging slots. Confident in his abilities and eager to share the experience with his friends, Mark opened a guidebook on his phone and checked the weather report one last time, which still listed Zion as dry. As the group finished their lunch and began packing their gear, they double-checked their backpacks to ensure they had all the necessary equipment for the day. Ropes, harnesses, wetsuits, helmets, everything was meticulously accounted for. At 1:30 p.m., they loaded their gear into 2 pickup trucks, driven by Don Teichner and Steve Arthur, and headed towards the entrance of Keyhole Canyon. As they made their way along the winding road, the skies above appeared clear and calm. From their vantage point, they could only see the southern and western horizons, where the sun still shone brightly. The northern and eastern skies, however, were obscured by the towering cliffs and rugged terrain of Zion, hiding the true nature of the weather beyond. What they couldn't see was a massive dark cloud moving swiftly from the southwest, just 15 miles south of their location. This ominous cloud, coupled with another storm forming to the southwest, was a harbinger of the chaos that would soon engulf the park. The group reached the small parking pullout at approximately 1:50 p.m. They were in high spirits, chatting and laughing as they unloaded their gear and prepared for the short hike to the drop point. They were so focused on the task at hand that they didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a slight drop in temperature, a change in the wind's direction, the kind of signs that experienced outdoorsmen usually heed with caution. The hike to the canyon entrance was brief, just a 5-minute walk from where they parked. As they descended, they lost cell service, cutting off their ability to check the weather updates. Unbeknownst to them, just half an hour later, at 2:22 p.m., the National Weather Service would issue a flash flood warning for the entire region. Had they known, they would have never entered the canyon. But fate had other plans. After finishing their snacks and double-checking their gear, the Valencia 7 began their trek towards Keyhole Canyon. The exact time they started their descent is uncertain, but it is believed to have been sometime between 3:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. Before entering the canyon, they paused to take a group photo, a snapshot that would become the last image of the group together outside the cave. Meanwhile, at around 4:15 p.m., another group of adventurers was also preparing to enter Keyhole Canyon. Jim Clary, a seasoned canyoneer, was accompanied by his brother Derek and their brother-in-law. They had been exploring Zion's various canyons throughout the weekend and had planned to tackle a more challenging route the next day. However, due to the potential for bad weather, they decided to enter Keyhole instead, knowing it was a quicker route that could be completed before any storms hit. As they made their way to the canyon, Jim's group passed by the trucks belonging to Steve Arthur and Don Teichner, recognizing that another group was already ahead of them. Jim, always cautious, knew that timing would be crucial. He wanted to avoid being stuck behind a less experienced group. So when they encountered the Valencia 7 at the entrance to the first rappel, he quickly assessed the situation. The upper portion of Keyhole Canyon was relatively flat, with only a few hundred feet of light scrambling. It was here that Jim's group first encountered the Valencia 7, who were preparing to descend the first rappel. The group was in high spirits, laughing and chatting as they prepared to lower themselves into the narrow slot. 5 of the 7 had already completed the rappel, while Mark McKenzie and Gary Favela were still at the top. Jim noticed immediately that while Mark had his own gear, the rest of the group appeared to be using rented equipment, a sign that they were likely not as experienced in canyoning. Recognizing the potential for delays, Jim asked Mark if they could pass the group. It was a common courtesy in canyoning, where more experienced groups often moved ahead to avoid congestion. Mark agreed, and Jim's group quickly made their way past the Valencia 7. As they continued down the canyon, the weather remained deceptively perfect. The sky overhead was still a bright blue, with barely a cloud in sight. The air was warm, and the conditions seemed ideal for canyoning. But appearances can be deceiving. Just 15 miles to the south, a powerful storm was wreaking havoc on a small town, causing the deadliest flash flood in Utah's history. Within 30 minutes, 1.5 inches of rain had fallen, turning dry riverbeds into raging torrents. 13 lives were lost in a matter of minutes as floodwaters swept away vehicles and destroyed homes. At that very moment, as the storm surged northward, Jim's group was approaching the third rappel in Keyhole Canyon. They were having a good time, but everything changed in an instant. A thunderclap echoed through the canyon walls, loud and close, sending a jolt of fear through the group. Jim's demeanor shifted immediately. Gone was the relaxed, confident adventurer, replaced by a man who knew the danger they were now in. He urged his brother-in-law to hurry, shouting at him to descend the rappel as quickly as possible. They knew they had only minutes to spare. The third rappel was one of the last obstacles before the canyon opened up again, giving them a chance to escape. But as they rushed down the narrow passage, the storm was bearing down on Zion, ready to unleash its fury. The clock was ticking, and the Valencia 7, still unaware of the impending danger, were about to face the most terrifying and deadly moments of their lives. As Jim Clary finished the third rappel, he paused at the bottom, alone for the first time. His two companions had already rushed ahead, sensing the urgency of the impending storm. Jim stood at the base of the rappel, the rope still dangling from above, and considered his next move. He knew that leaving the rope in place could save the Valencia 7 precious minutes if they followed closely behind. But then he hesitated, recalling that the group was using a different, less advanced technique than his own. The fear that his setup might confuse them or slow them down ultimately led him to make a difficult decision. Jim pulled the rope down, coiling it tightly before he began his own hasty retreat toward the canyon's exit. Just as he started moving, the skies above seemed to split open. What had been a calm, dry day turned into a torrential downpour in mere seconds. Rain hammered down with the force of a fire hose. The intensity so sudden and severe, it was as if the heavens themselves had unleashed their fury. Jim, who had experienced many storms in the wilderness, would later describe it as the fastest weather change he had ever seen. The rain wasn't just heavy, it was violent, with hailstones pelting the ground, adding to the chaos. By the time Jim's group reached the road, the water was already waist-deep, flowing with incredible force. It was only 4:45 p.m., but the floodwaters were already surging through the landscape, turning dry washes into deadly torrents. Jim knew with a sickening certainty that the Valencia 7, still deep in the canyon, stood no chance of making it out in time. The rain began to let up just after 5 p.m., but by then, the damage had been done. The flash flood, which had caught everyone by surprise, was the deadliest in Utah's history. As the storm passed, leaving destruction in its wake, the seriousness of what had happened began to take hold. 3 hours after the Valencia 7 entered Keyhole Canyon, a park ranger placed a note on their trucks in the parking lot. The note was a simple request, asking them to check in with the park authorities once they returned. At the time, the ranger likely didn't know the full extent of the danger they faced, but the note became a grim marker, as the group would never return to see it. The next morning, search and rescue teams moved into Keyhole Canyon, knowing the chances of finding survivors were slim. The canyoning permits were suspended, and the rescue teams prepared to navigate the challenging terrain. But not everyone in the park knew about the tragedy that had unfolded just a day earlier. Kyle Anderson, a 25-year-old off-duty canyoning guide, led his two friends, India and Jay Piacatelli, into the canyon that morning. The Piacatellis were newlyweds, honeymooning through Utah's national parks. With no canyoning experience themselves, they trusted Kyle to guide them safely. Given the forecast of more storms, they chose Keyhole Canyon, thinking it would be a safer, shorter route. The trio entered Keyhole Canyon in the early afternoon. The storm from the previous day had left pools of water scattered throughout. The first and second rappels went smoothly, but when they reached the third rappel, something felt wrong. A rope was already attached at the rappel point. Kyle called out, expecting to hear voices from another group, but no one answered. The rope hung still. The uneasy feeling grew stronger. Kyle decided to go first. He clipped into the rope and began descending the 30-foot wall. As he reached the bottom, he noticed a shoe tangled in the rope. He grabbed it, and to his horror, found it was attached to a body. Kyle flipped the lifeless figure over. It was one of the Valencia 7. He shouted up to his friends, his voice echoing through the canyon. The light-hearted adventure had turned into a nightmare. The body was later identified as Gary Favela, a member of the Valencia hiking crew. Earlier that day, rangers had already found Steve Arthur's body about a mile downstream in Clear Creek. The discovery of Favela's body confirmed the worst. The rangers intensified their search, knowing the others were likely nearby. By Thursday evening, all 7 bodies were found. Some were still in Keyhole Canyon, while others had been carried downstream by the floodwaters. Linda Arthur, Steve's wife, was the last to be found, 5 miles downstream. The search teams, exhausted and heartbroken, informed the families of the recovery. For the families, the news was devastating. The Arthurs' children were in disbelief. Their parents were always cautious and always prepared. How could they be caught by a flood? The emotional toll was immense. The Arthurs' bodies were escorted home by deputies from the Ventura County Sheriff's Department. They were placed in the same casket, a final symbol of their life together. Along the way, deputies from different departments took turns escorting the black SUV carrying them home. In the aftermath, the Favela family filed a claim against the Park Service. They argued that there should have been a way to warn the victims of the incoming flood. But by mid-March, the Park Service hadn't made any policy changes. The events of September 14, 2015, would go down in history as the deadliest canyoning disaster in the United States and the worst accident Zion National Park had seen in its 97 years.